Okay, so there are a lot of ways to solve quadratic equations. Quadratics are when you have x squareds, all right, as your highest exponent. And one of the ways is factoring, but all of them don't always factor, okay? And another of the ways is graphing, where you find where it crosses the x-axis on your calculator, all right? And then we have completing a square, and we also have the quadratic formula, which we're going to do in either the next 2 days. One of the next 2 lessons is quadratic formula. All right, so there are so many ways to solve quadratics. All right, 118, completing the square. So first let's talk about what that even means. And what it means is we want to make everything have a perfect square binomial. For example, if you have the exact same binomial times binomial, right, x plus 3 squared, and you FOIL it out, you get x squared. And then this one is 3x plus 3x, which is 6x. And then plus the 3 times the 3 is 9. All right, so this is called a perfect square trinomial because it factors to the exact same binomial twice. All right, so perfect square trinomial can be factored really nicely. So we're going to make perfect square trinomials, all right? What would make this a perfect square trinomial? What do you think? 4. It would be a 4, all right? And why would that work? Because when you factor it, you would get x plus 2 times x plus 2, because 2 plus 2 is 4 and 2 times 2 is 4, all right? How did we find that lovely number? The pattern that you will notice is you take the middle number of 4 and you divide by 2. And that number is 2. And then you square it to get 4. All right? What makes this a perfect square trinomial is what that should say. So let's write that down. X squared minus 8x plus what? Yes. Now, if you can't come up with it on your own, that's okay. You're going to memorize this. You take half the middle number. So what's half of negative 8? Negative 4. And you square it to get plus 16. Now, how does this factor tractor? X minus 4 times x minus 4. Because negative 4 plus negative 4 is negative 8. And negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16. Notice the half is always what goes in the parentheses, okay? And we could always also write this as x minus 4 squared, which we will be doing when we do these, okay? All right, x squared plus 10x plus a blank. So we take half the middle number. What is half the middle number? And we square it. What goes here? 25. How does this factor tractor? Yep, x plus 5 all squared, because 5 plus 5 is 10, and 5 times 5 is 25. What if you get a not nice number, like 7, okay? All the ones we did before were divisible by 2. All the middle numbers you could divide by 2 evenly, all right? If you get one that does not divide by 2, you follow the process with fractions, no decimals, okay? So we take half the middle number, and you leave it as a fraction since it does not divide nicely, and you square it. And you square the top and the bottom. So what goes here? 49 fourths. And then when you write it as a binomial times a binomial, you do x plus 7 halves times x plus 7 halves, or you square one of those, right? Because when you add 7 halves plus 7 halves, you get 14 halves, which is 7. And when you multiply these, you get 49 fourths, okay? Yes? No. You can write squared. Is that what you're doing? Talking about? Yeah. I'll show you this is what we'll do on the homework. That was just the intro. Yeah, sorry. Now let's do the whole thing because there's an equal sign now. So that was just showing you how to make a perfect square trinomial. Now we are actually going to solve by completing the square, meaning there's an equal sign. There's a little more involved now, okay? So what you want to do is get your x squared and your x on one side of the equation, and you want the x squared to be positive. So I'm going to leave the x squared here, and I'm going to add the 10x, and then I'm going to put plus a space. All right, and the reason I'm adding the 10x is because I moved it over here, right? And we also want to get rid of this. We're going to move this to the other side, okay? So we have our x's together, and this positive 6 gets moved over, so it makes negative 6 when you move it to the other side, okay? Now we're going to complete the square. We take half the middle number, which is 5, and we square it. And I just write it underneath to show what I'm doing. We're going to add 25. Now, when I was just making perfect square trinomials, I could just add 25, but I have an equal sign. So if I add 25 to one side, I also need to add 25 to the other side. Okay, so you're going to add it to both sides because now I didn't change the value of the equation. Legal math right there. Okay. All right, now I have a perfect square trinomial. How does this factor? X plus 5 times x plus 5, and we will square it, exactly. Okay, now we're going to add these together. 25 minus 6 is 19. Now we can actually solve this. This is how we solve by completing the square. We made it a perfect square trinomial. I am now going to square root both sides because that undoes the square. Okay, and that leaves me with just x plus 5. I got rid of the square. Be really careful on this side when you take the square root. You have to do plus and minus the square root of 19. Then we're going to subtract the 5 from both sides. And we want to put the minus 5 in the front of this. So those are my two solutions. Negative 5 plus the square root of 19. Negative 5 minus the square root of 19. If I made those into decimals, like I plugged that into my calculator, that would be where the parabola crossed the x-axis, okay? It would cross at those decimal places if you were to plug it in and graph it. Let's try another one. X squared minus 8x equals 33. We already have our friends together right here. X squared minus 8x. We're just going to do plus a space. And we already have this random constant over here by itself. That's what we want. So you always put your x squareds and your other number on the other side, and we have to do plus a space. Okay, we take half of this number, what's half of negative 8, and we square it, which is positive 16. Okay, so we're going to put a plus 16 on both sides. All right, now I have to complete the square. What goes in my parentheses squared? How does this factor tractor? Good job. So be sure you use the minus sign in there, okay? Don't forget the negative. Add these together, that's 49. This one's going to be nice, okay? Now we're solving for x, so we square root both sides. The square root undoes the square. And on this side, I have plus and minus 7, because the square root of 49 is 7. Don't forget the plus minus when you're solving for x. And then we're going to add 4 to both sides. So we'll do positive 7 plus 4 is 11. And then we'll do negative 7 plus 4 is negative 3. We could have solved this one by factoring from the start, okay? I'm just going to show you because it's cool. You don't have to do this. But if I moved the 33 over, what multiplies to negative 33? And adds to negative 8, so it'd be negative 11 and plus 3. And then your solutions would be positive 11 and negative 3. So just so many ways to solve quadratics. Isn't that great? Okay, let's try one that has a fraction, because that's not fun. Okay? So first, put all your x squareds on the same, or your x's on the same side and your constant on the other. So we want to do x squared. The negative 7x moves to the other side and becomes positive 7x. Put plus a space. The negative 9 needs to move over here, so it becomes positive 9 over here, and then plus a space. All right, we take half the middle number and square it. All right, show your work on these fraction ones especially. All right, otherwise it's hard to factor them in your head. All right, so you want to write 7/2 squared, which means we're adding 49/4 to both sides. You square the top and the bottom. No decimals on these, probably no calculators. So the other reason you should write this little step down is it tells you what to put in your parentheses here. Okay, because again, they're not always easy to factor in your head when it's fractions, but the half always goes in parentheses squared like that. Okay, on the right-hand side, we need common denominators, so we're multiplying this by 4 over 4 to get 36 fourths plus 49 fourths. So 85 fourths. Okay, now we're going to square root both sides to get rid of the square. That leaves me with x plus 7 halves. On this side, you got to have your plus minus. You cannot take the square root of 85, so we leave that, but you can take the square root of 4, which is 2. And then we subtract 7 halves, and we subtract 7 halves. That goes in the front of your answer, the negative 7 halves, plus or minus the square root of 85 over 2. You're going to complete the square a lot in Algebra 2 and Algebra 3. So it's just like barely introduced to you here at the end of Algebra 1, right when we're almost done, for you to forget it over the summer and be retaught it in Algebra 2, okay? And do it all year. But let's practice it. Oh, you know what? I think we're good. That's a lot. Let's try the whiteboards. All right.